rotation because the angle is a finite angle. Now let's suppose that this angle were infinitesimal, an infinitesimal angle. So in that case, the Lie algebra is what is the mathematical structure that underlies the infinitesimal group structure. In this example, there is a matrix generator of the Lie algebra associated to your group. And the matrix generator is given by this matrix. You notice that this matrix, X, has an I and minus I of the diagonal. This matrix is, in this case, Hermitian. Remember what we call a Hermitian matrix? It's a matrix that, yeah. So here, when you have the Hermitian of a matrix is you take the transpose of the matrix, you flip I with minus I, and then you take the complex conjugate. So a Hermitian matrix, what you do is you do two things. You perform the transpose of the matrix, and then you take the complex conjugate of that. And this is what you call the Hermitian of a matrix. Now, a matrix is Hermitian in this case because you see that minus I is the complex conjugate of I, and I is the complex conjugate of minus I. Okay? So when you look at along the main diagonal, you'll see that these elements are the complex conjugates of each other. So in this case, this matrix is Hermitian. You know. Are you familiar with this, Fang? You recall what you mean by Hermitian matrix and the transpose?
I believe I learned it like 20 years ago.
Yeah. Okay. So when you see a matrix like that, you look at the diagonal, and if the entries of the diagonal are complex conjugates of each other, then you know that the matrix is Hermitian. You know, that's the simplest way to see it. No.
Carlos, there was a lot of information there. Can I ask?
Yes. Let me go back. Yeah, I'll go back.
So
Yeah.
I have a few questions.
Yeah.
So can you
Yeah.
make it a little clear
Yeah.
between the continuity property of the manifold
Yes.
parameters
Yes.
and the discreteness of the group?
Yeah. Well, here I'm talking about a continuously group. Imagine in this room we have 3 dimensions. We have 3 axes. So the dimension of the group is 3-dimensional. Like in this room, we have 3 axes, so it's 3 dimensions. Now, how many points do we have in this room? We have an infinity of points. Okay, so one has to be very careful. The order of the group in that case is the number of points in your manifold, which is infinite. The dimension of the group has to do with the dimension of this room, which is 3 dimensions because we have 3 axes. Okay, so
This is not an example of a discrete group.
no, it's a continuum group.
So Lie groups are not examples of discrete
No, it's the continuous analog of a discrete group.
of a discrete. So when you gave when you mentioned discrete groups, you were talking about discrete groups in general.
In general.
Not particularly
Yeah.
applicable to Lie groups.
Yes. So then I want to go from the notion of discrete group, how you jump from that notion from the discrete to a continuum. That's what I was given. Imagine that you have a discrete set of points in this room. If you have a discrete set of points, that will be a discrete group. But if you have a continuum of points, that will be a continuous Lie group. Okay.
If I impose a constraint on my theta to take on integral multiples,
Yeah.
that will be a group.
That will be that. Well, in that case, that will. If the theta parameter is discrete, that will be your discretization of your continuous group.
But will it be a Lie group?
No. It won't be, no.
But is there a notion of such a group? Such a Lie group?
You could have, well, I guess you call them algebraic groups. Remember, you have to have a composition rule. You have to make sure that the product of one matrix with the other is going to give you another matrix that belongs to your group. So you have to be very careful. When you imagine you give the theta parameter discrete values. Yeah? You have to be very careful. You have to make sure that when you multiply one matrix by the other,
I should get
another matrix that belongs to your set.
Correct.
Okay?
Would that be a problem?
That will impose constraints on your theta parameters. You have to be very careful.
So if theta is discrete, so
Yeah.
let's just work out an example. If theta is just takes some discrete values,
Yes.
then I would get products of the form what? Cosine squared?
Well, yeah, then you have to, imagine you multiply the 2 matrices together, you're going to have the cosine of theta 1 times the cosine of theta 2, you know, minus theta 1 times theta 2.
Cosine times sine.
Yeah.
Should not be a problem.
Yeah.
That's just sine
Yeah.
2 theta.
Yeah. No, but remember, when you have theta has one value, theta sub 1, and if theta has another value, theta sub 2, then you have to be careful.
Okay.
Yeah. So you have to make sure that when you multiply those matrices, when you are going to have a matrix that belongs to your set. So you have to be very careful.
If it does satisfy the condition, then can it be a group?
No, well, I guess it will be a group, not a group, because your parameter has to be continuous. Yes, the
So,
parameter.
and the second question
Yeah.
is, you
Yeah.
say the Lie algebra is a mathematical structure that underlies the infinitesimal group structure.
Yeah. I'm going to go through. I'm going to in more detail. Yes, yes,
My
yes.
last question is like,
Yeah.
what example of this generator that what were you trying to
Okay, this is the generator that generates infinitesimal translations along one axis. Okay.
translation?
Yes. For example, in here in the blackboard, imagine I have the z axis.
Who is part of you. You have conflicts going on in your own body. All kinds of microorganisms are eating each other up. If that wasn't happening, you would be. So all those interrelationships, whether they appear to be friendly relationships as between bees and flowers, or conflicting relationships as between birds and humans, they are actually forms of cooperation. That is mutual arousal. You have to understand this as the basis, apply this, not forcing anything, and you get spontaneity. A life which is so of itself, which is natural, which is not forced, which is not unduly self-conscious. Now, another term that is important, although I'm not aware that this word occurs in Laozi thought. It's found in greater use at a much later time in Chinese thought. It's called Neo-Confucian, and it's also used in Buddhism. But it is a very useful word for understanding the sort of order that all this constitutes. It's the word means. And this means, originally, the markings in Jays, or perhaps the grain in wood or the fiber. It is translated nowadays in most dictionaries as reason or principle. But this is a very good translation. Joseph Needham suggested that organic pattern. Now you see the markings in jade are always regarded as blue. You might say if you look down at the water here, you see the waves break for the patterns in the water. Now if you watch those patterns, you know they never make an aesthetic mistake. Never. But they are not symmetrical. They're very difficult to describe. They're wiggled. So are the markings in jade. So is the grain in wood. But we love the grain. And you see just uneven paintings of rock based on the these all exhibit meaning. That is to say, they are forms which we know are ordinary, and we can distinguish them from essence quite clearly. And so in the same way, the bone pattern, the rock pattern, the patterns of dark vegetation are at once extraordinarily orderly, but they don't have an obvious. Nobody can ever pin it down. That's what I'd like to say. You know that there is order there. There's something quite different from a mess, but there's no way of really getting it. Now, in order to be able to paint that sort of way, or to live that sort of way, or to deliver justice that way, as if you were a judge, you have to have it innately. You have to have an essential sense of Li. And there's no way of describing it. This is the very devil for teachers. Because you see, all our universities and schools are trying to teach creativity. That's the great thing these days. You know? And you hear at the SLM, all sorts of people are giving courses and workshops in creativity. Now, the trouble is this. If we found out a method whereby we could teach creativity, and everybody could just explain how it was done, it would no longer be of interest. What always is an essential element in the creative is the mysterious, the dark. It's like the black in white, the impenetrable, and yet the profound depth out of which glorious things nobody can see why. There's a poem that says that when the bird calls, the mountain becomes more mysterious. Imagine, for example, you're in a mountain valley, and everything is very silent, and suddenly a crow squawks somewhere. You don't know where that crow is, and that little sound emphasizes the silence. Now, all those things have in them, you see, an element of mystery. There's a Chinese poem which puts it this way. It is a poem written by a man who has gone to find a sage in the mountains. And the sage has a little hut at the foot of the mountain and a boy there who is his servant. I asked the boy beneath the pines. He said the master's gone alone, herb gathering somewhere on the mount, cloud hidden, whereabouts unknown. In so many athletic and artistic skills, you will find a teacher who teaches you how to do it without forcing it.
There are 20-some-odd moons, and we will have turned our almost complete ignorance about these moons into great knowledge. These moons, by the way, are not like our own. Some of them are icy, some of them are covered with sodium and other salts, as if there was a great ocean which lost into space. These are very strange places and very interesting to explore. Beyond Jupiter and its moons is Saturn, the great ringed planet. The nature of the rings is something we'll say a word about later. The Voyager spacecraft will also pass by Saturn and its rings. It will, in fact, then pass perhaps by Uranus, if it is still working, and will inexorably leave the solar system. It is condemned to wander forever in the dark between the stars. Its transmitters will eventually die, and it will be silent, but still the most distant emissary of mankind. We thought that in the remote chance that there are other beings on planets of other stars who wander between the stars and capture derelict spacecraft backward civilizations like ours, that it might be nice to send a message. And so there are phonograph records on each of the two Voyager spacecraft with instructions for use, written not in English. It's unlikely they speak English. And those records contain some spoken and written readings, a great many photographs, scientific information, sounds of the Earth, some readings from whales as well as people, and an hour and a half of the music of the world, among which was the Japanese shakuhachi. So we are, in a very preliminary way, trying to say hello to the cosmos. Now, on the outskirts of the solar system, in fact halfway between here and the nearest star, are the comets. They are the closest thing to interstellar matter that we are likely to be able to examine in the near future. They're an almost complete mystery and another major objective of space exploration. Now, this picture of the solar system is relatively recent. For most of human history, people thought that the Earth was at the center, not just of the solar system, but of the universe, and that not only all the planets went around the Earth once every day, the Earth was not imagined to rotate, but also the sun went around the Earth. And that was a kind of astronomical egotism, which we thought we were splendid, and all the other objects in the universe somehow secondary to the Earth and its inhabitants. Well, what we have found is just the opposite, that we are a very humdrum and ordinary locale in the universe. And one way in which this was to consider the question of the phases of the planets. Now, we know that the moon goes through phases. We see full moon, half moon, quarter moon, crescent, new moon. But what about the planets? Now, in the old Earth-centered view, the planets, in this case Venus, were imagined as a lovely old book which has moving parts, like books today, which only accidentally have moving parts. This one is moving on purpose. Venus was imagined to go around the Earth, but also to have a little internal motion of its own, and that, with the sun out beyond Venus, made a certain prediction about the phases of Venus. You would sometimes see partly illuminated Venus, sometimes see a full illuminated Venus, but no one had a telescope to see whether Venus went through phases, and if so, what company. Now, here is the Earth-centered view of the universe, with the Earth here, the planets, and the sun going around the Earth. This is the supposed orbit of the sun. And in the sun-centered view of the universe, the planets, including the Earth, go around the sun. And as this old picture shows, go through phases. Well, in the sun-centered view, or hypothesis, let's try and see what the phases ought to be like. What I'm going to do is to have someone be Earth and someone be Venus, and I will try to be the sun. And just because somebody big has not written light. And let's see what the phases of Venus would be like. So could we have an Earth person? Thank you. This is an excellent Earth person. Could you please stand by, let's say, a few steps up, by that camera, and we will be eventually viewing things on the television screen from the point of view of that camera and that Earth person. And now could we have a Venus person?
University of California, and we are all presumably intellectuals. And we need to further the intellectual life. We need to further the disciplines of learning languages, of psychology, of science, of physics and chemistry, medicine, and so on and so forth. But underlying that, there must be a background. In other words, you need plain white paper in order to write something. And so in the same way, underlying all our thinking, there must be emptiness. And that's what we call in Asia, jhana, which means the practice of meditation. You can also call it yoga. These are really, there are little nitpicking details we might make between them, but they're really equivalent words. Jhana, yoga, Zen, and of course also the Sufi disciplines are all the same thing, but they are largely missing in Western religion. because Western religion is excessively talkative, excessively didactic, and does not really practice silence. The nearest thing we have, I mean, we have some Catholic orders, like Trappists, and we have the Quakers, who practice silent disciplines, but I'm rather inclined to believe that they talk to themselves while they're silent. Real silence, jhana, is stopping talking to yourself inside your head. Is to get real mental silence. Now, that doesn't mean that you have a blank mind. You are vividly aware of what is, only you don't give it any name. Now, if you, for the moment, would experiment with this by closing your eyes and listening to all sounds whatsoever that are going on, but don't try to identify or name them. Listen to the susurrus of the world in the same way as you would listen to classical music without asking what it means. If you find yourself thinking compulsively, unable to stop naming what is going on, don't try to stop it. Listen to yourself doing that in the same way as you would be listening to the air conditioning. And as and when I say anything, don't try to make sense of it. Just listen to the sound of the voice. And I ask you, listening to what is, can you hear anything past or anything future? Can you hear yourself as a listener? It's amazing how many things there are that aren't so. And just for a moment, also be aware of your breath. Are you doing it, or is it happening to you? Or both? Or neither? Listen and feel the breath as it wants to go, as your ears want to respond to the waves. And don't be uptight about coffee.
Now, can I go into the automobile business and compete with the auto trust? If I can get in a word. Not a chance. Can I go into the grocery business and compete with the chain stores? Will you shut up? Not a chance. Monopoly is the menace of free enterprise. As I look back 60 years ago. Where were you 60 years ago? He was a Clinton and great-grandfather died. Very well now. Have you finished? Now let me say something. Let me tell you how wrong you are. In the first place. In the first place. Now I've forgotten what I wanted to say. And the atomic bomb. It's a crime that when the world cries for atomic energy, you want to make atomic bombs. Me? I'm against atomic bombs. You want to wipe out civilization. Destroy all life on this planet. I lost my job because I didn't want atomic bombs. You and your kind think that atomic bombs can solve their problem. Listen, you little rat. Today man has too much power. The Roman Empire collapsed with the assassination of Caesar. And why? Because of too much power. Feudalism blew up with the French Revolution. And why? Because of too much power. And today the whole world will blow up. And why? Because of too much power. The monopoly of power is a menace to freedom. It degrades and victimizes every individual. And where is the individual?
I don't know.
Lost in terror because he's made to hate instead of love. If civilization is to survive, we must combat power until the dignity and peace of man are restored.
What is the meaning of this?
To be in this life. Very often individuals will say, give me a sign. I wish I had a sign. Excitement is that sign. That is your specific gauge. That is your indication. This is me. That is why it excites you, and not perhaps someone else. For it is your gauge. And again, when acting upon any opportunity within that excitement, utilizing the knowledge of integration within your integrity, you will always find a positive result. You will always find that thing to be most effortless. You will always find, though perhaps not always in a way that you expect, another opportunity arising from your willingness to act on what is a representation of who you are. And you can begin a chain of events whereby one exciting thing gives an opportunity to do the next exciting thing. And as you are doing these things, because you are acting within your integrity, you are being of service to yourself in a positive way. Again, understanding that everybody else is an extension of you, you are being of service to others if you are following your excitement with integrity in a positive way. And there then begins to be a positive momentum within your life. And it becomes quite obvious. We refer to the full institution of what we are speaking of as the ecstatic explosion of coincidence and synchronicity. For what occurs is the things you say you desire begin to manifest in your life, very often in the most unlikely of ways. And you say, oh, what a coincidence. Well, yes, everything's a coincidence. Coincidence. Incidence is happening at the same time, but not an accident. For everything, because it is all an extension of one thing, is interrelated. And though one thing may not seem to have anything to do with another, by definition, they do. And by definition, anything that excites you, because it is a representation of who you are, is somehow connected to everything else that excites you. Everything. Even if it does not on the surface appear that way, they are literally stepping stones one to the other. And you cannot get to one without stepping on each stone. So therefore, beginning to validate your excitement and act upon it with integrity, and beginning to utilize in a positive way all of your creation, will, in a very accelerated fashion, fasten your seatbelt, propel your life into a life of positive, preferential, ecstatic joy. And at the same time, nice touch, you will be of service to yourself and others and make a positive impact upon your society. Therefore, allow us to thank you for your willingness to begin to open the doors that you have in the partitions with which you separate your consciousness into parts. You are always a 100% consciousness. Even if you use 90% of that consciousness to make it seem as though you are only using 10%, you are still using it all. And therefore you can act as one whole homogeneous being by simply understanding again that nothing is extraneous. And timing is synchronicity as well. The timing of things has a particular significance. When these seemingly negative things come up is significant. That timing allows you to know that if you are willing in that moment to look at it as in a positive way, that is the perfect timing to integrate it. So therefore allow your timing to be obvious. When something comes up, you can then deal with it. When you ask, how does this serve me exactly as it is, you need not dig into every little wormhole there. Simply start out allowing it to be as obvious as possible. And when you find how it serves you, realize there are other things that you can do, other ways, other methods, other means to get the same result, and begin to consciously act on these other methods, and you will no longer need that symbol to punch you in the head. Therefore, again, we thank you for your willingness to begin to homogenize your consciousness and begin to fully realize who you are. This is how our society functions and exists, and we communicate this to you to allow you the opportunity, if you wish, there is no insistence on our part, to begin as a society to come into your full being. And that would then allow us the opportunity to interact with you, shall we say, in a slightly more conventional manner, face to face. But we have no desire in that sense to have your power that you are now beginning to take back to be given away, particularly to us. We do not need or want your power. We have enough of our own, thank you very much. But we are willing to share as equals with you when you are willing to view yourself as equal to us. And beginning to utilize, determine your reality in a positive way will afford you and allow you that same equality in your own consciousness. Because again, from our perspective, you are already equal to all other creations, all other forms and expressions throughout the multiverse. There is simply no difference in quality, only perhaps quantity of focus or expansion. We are more expanded, but we are not.
We find the Earth in a strange locale, in this case just passing in front of the Sun. It makes for a very beautiful picture. It does not tell us much about the Earth. The Earth is the completely dark thing in the foreground, which is almost obscuring the Sun. As we get closer to the Earth, we can observe more detail. Here you can see the wispy, lovely cloud patterns, and you can see that on the average they do cover about half the Earth. We can see down at the bottom the Antarctic ice cap. We can see a continent underneath the clouds. That is, the clouds come and go, but underneath them are features which don't seem to come and go. The continents are the same every time they appear over the surface of the rotating Earth. And there are also dark regions near the continents, which eventually we would discover were oceans. And that would be very strange, because nowhere else in the solar system, at least today, are there oceans. And if we looked in the extreme upper right-hand portion of this picture, we would see the Horn of Africa, the Arabian Peninsula, the Sinai Peninsula. There would be no sign, for example, of tank battles in this region. And the reason for that is that our resolution, our ability to see fine detail, is only about 100 kilometers in this picture. We could not see anything smaller than 100 kilometers across. And therefore, if we were to see a tank, it would have to be 100 kilometers long. And that is a very large tank, which, fortunately, does not exist on the Earth. So to examine more closely, we must get better pictures. And here we see a close-up of the same region. This is the region of the Nile Valley and the Ismaila Canal. You can see this beautiful cloud which runs from lower left to upper right. It is a jet stream cloud. You can see lots of wispy clouds. At this point, our meteorologists, our experts in weather, would start getting very interested. Our geologists, our experts on the surface features of the planet, would get very interested. Our biologists would be dreadfully bored. They would not see anything of interest, no hint of the Earth being inhabited, although they might argue that liquid water was good for life. There would be others who would dispute that. Here is a lovely picture of a cyclone, which would make our meteorologists extremely happy. They would study this picture for a long time. Here, well, there's a strange object in the foreground, which I ask you to ignore. That, of course, would indicate the presence of life. This is a Skylab spacecraft, but again, underneath it, all sorts of little wispy clouds. Here is another incidental spacecraft in the foreground. This is Gemini. Again, by the way, look at the edge or limb of the Earth. You can see this little blue band following the horizon, and that is the atmosphere of the Earth seen edge on. The tall stick with a cylinder on top of it is the means by which astronauts communicate to the ground. I sometimes like to think that it's an old tomato soup can connected to Houston, Texas by a long string, which you can see a little of. The other end of the string is another can, and they talk to each other that way. The trouble is that the string gets wound around the Earth many times, and it becomes a little awkward. That's not actually the way the communication is done. It's done by radio. That's the radio antenna. It just looks like an old can in a string. That's all a parenthesis I couldn't resist. Let's go back to our extraterrestrial guys. Here is a lovely volcano. We are looking at the volcanic caldera, the hole in the top of the volcano. You see this dark thing right there. This is in fact the island of Hawaii, and is alleged to have a great deal of life on it, but you can't see anything of it here. All you can see is a volcano. Here's another volcano. I think this is Etna, and again, much the same situation. A beautiful mountain, no sign of nearby life. And here is another sign of geological activity. On the left in color is the San Francisco Bay Area and the Great San Andreas Fault coming down from the bay, which is a sign of great geological activity. There are many earthquakes there. In fact, eventually, California will drift out into the Pacific Ocean because of a split or tear along that line. Now, that will not happen soon, in some people's minds, regretfully, but will happen in the next few million years. Also in that picture on the right is another similar feature, the great East African Rift Valley, which is beginning here at the Dead Sea and goes all the way down to South Africa. It is 5,000 kilometers or 3,000 miles long and is a sign of great recent geological activity on the Earth. When we look at Mars later, we will find that there is a perhaps similar feature there. Here is a crater in North Africa. Perhaps it is of impact origin, perhaps not. Such craters are formed on the Earth as on the Moon, but the Earth has very efficient erosion. Wind and water rub things out, and for that reason, we have at any given time very few craters, even though big rocks fall.
And storm results in action. You can also trace back flow in act as though you think, as though you feel, as though you express a belief. With understanding that you contain all beliefs and express what perhaps one with brings along with several others at a time allows you in your power to gather yourself back to understand that it is really quite simple to convey or express as though you trust in that decision. I have presented this particular delineation before. The reason being because it is quite useful. This is how you are already doing it. And when you say and understand that you make a decision, this implies there are other choices. This implies that you can decide something else. This is where you can express what you refer to as free will, but only if you first acknowledge that you have something to do with the process, that you, in and of yourself, are involved in the process of creating your life. We have briefly discussed three general phases of transformation. From being a completely limited being that believes they exist within a reality, to creating your reality consciously and through less limitation, less separation, more integration, according to preference. The three phases are very simple chapters. Awakening, phase one. Perhaps again you can say awakening is simply the notion that, well, is it possible that I'm right? Maybe not even create my own entire reality, but have some minute degree of decision or choice in how it plays out. That can be as subtle as awakening itself. Now, this generally will expand to, well, perhaps I actually have more than just a little to do with it, until it full blossoms to, you mean I create my own reality? Even entertaining that notion is part and parcel of an awakening from an unconscious style of creation to a conscious style of creation. So phase one, the awakening is simply again knowing that there is a choice, knowing that there even may be options. Phase two is the acceleration of this idea, accelerating once you have accepted the notion that perhaps you create your own reality, and you accelerate this awareness through attraction. You attract to yourself through the desire to be a conscious creator, through the desire to create your life in a particular preferential, integrated way, the knowledge, the resources, the timing, the individual who will allow you to assist yourself in accelerating this awareness, in expanding this awareness. And you then attract the notions, the tools, the attitudes, the orientation that allow you to understand that only has very small, yet rigid assumptions resulted in the aspects of your life occurring that you do not prefer. Nothing overwhelming or bigger than you, because nothing can be bigger than you when it exists within you. You are the biggest thing around. So that acceleration will generally occur as very small seeming ideas. When you apply these small ideas, however, they replace the more limiting, very small other ideas and make great, grand, sweeping changes in the face of your life.
That's the essence of the retreat, deepening presence. It is that state of consciousness, that's the retreat. In that sense, you could be on a permanent retreat after this. And in that sense, the retreat doesn't leave you and you don't leave it. Although the scenery around you is going to change. Some of you are leaving today, others are leaving in a day or two, 1 or 2 days' time. So soon the scenery is going to change, and there's a continuous flux of things. As described by Heraclitus or Heraclitus, one of the first philosophers of ancient Greece, pre-Socratic, so he taught before Socrates taught. And he's famous, of course, for the saying, everything flows, and also for the saying, you cannot step into the same river twice. He emphasized, he lived about the same time as the Buddha, but of course in Greece. He emphasized the impermanence, just as the Buddha did. It must have been in the consciousness, there was an awakening at that time. So this retreat on the surface is impermanent, of course. Everything is. But soon after Heraclitus, another philosopher came, whose name was Parmenides, also a pre-Socratic, and he said to Heraclitus, I'm not sure, nobody knows if they actually ever met or he just read, he said, you got it all wrong. Nothing real ever changes. At the heart of the universe, there's a timeless essence. This is a very free translation. So he said impermanence is ultimately a kind of illusion from his perspective, and he said reality remains constant and timeless. The rest is just fleeting forms like dreams. Of course, both are correct, Heraclitus and Parmenides. So there is, at the heart of you and at the heart of the universe, which is the same thing, there's a timeless essence. So there's the temporal you, the person, and we saw that when we watched these movie clips of the city scene in Berlin 1900, the temporal selves moving about the surface of things, and then disappearing. And so there's the temporal you, the person, and then there is the transcendent you, which is connected to the transcendent dimension of the universe. In some teachings it might be called the higher self. That's the consciousness, the conscious being that you are. Because as you go within, you don't immediately dissolve into God. There's the non-physical being, the higher self, but then they're not divided. And then there's the transcendent dimension. I don't normally use the term higher self because it makes you look upward, you're looking for yourself. I'm getting a message from my higher self, it's coming through. A better expression might be your deeper self. So there's the temporal you, the person, and we saw that when we watched these movie clips of the city scene in Berlin 1900. The temporal selves moving about the surface of things, and then disappearing. Better expression might be your deeper self, deepening presence. And if you can sense as you move away from here, this unchanging presence in you, then you can enjoy the short-lived nature of all things. You don't need to attach yourself to anything in particular. You can appreciate everything. You can honor everything. See the beauty and The Spanish for to love, te quiero, literally means I want you. It's the same word. And that's the normal word for I love you. So that's a very honest way of saying it, because most love comes from the ego. It might have other elements which mixed in